obligations and commitments and responsibilities from the man to the woman. And the beauty of it is that it can't be changed. There it is. It's as clear as could be. And, one of the parties says, I just think we've drifted apart. I just don't love you anymore. And the response to that is, could you pass the salt, please? I mean, what you told me is so. I'm more interested in this morning's headlines than what you've just told me is utterly irrelevant. I'm sorry to hear it, but I'm sure you'll get over it in time. Yes. Our relationship to sex and money is incredibly profound. So much so that I think most people would agree that any human being who has no money worries and who has an incredible marriage and family should have 2 bald spots in the carpet next to his bed where his knees go every night, where he thanks God for his good fortune. What more could you want? Well, people might say, well, good health is important as well. I don't have to waste your time on the reams of data that link good health, leaving aside genetic things or just sheer bad luck, but in general terms, the link between health and no financial stress and strong marriage are so prevalent and so widely known as to not warrant any waste of time whatsoever. So yes, if you've got no money worries and no marital worries, you should be on your knees. How wonderful is that? And all of that wrapped up in the first couple of chapters of the Bible, where we find the entire structure of marriage given to us in the relationship between Adam and Eve, and Dr. Rabin, you were very, very interesting a little earlier today on your correct Hebrew identification of the differences. Adam is known as the primal man, Adam. But at what point, when is the very first time that he's called Ish, that he's called a man? Only after he has a woman. Only after the woman is there. Essentially, God says to Adam, what should we call her? And he says, well, why don't we call her the female? You see, in Hebrew, nouns are very easy to identify. There's gender in English in Hebrew nouns. So even a word like a table or a chair, in English, it's irrelevant as to whether they're masculine or feminine. In Hebrew, every noun has a gender. And in 9 times out of 10, the way a masculine noun is converted to a feminine noun is by putting a suffix at the end of "a." And so Ish, as you heard this morning, is no longer just a primal male human being, but Ish, Adam is that, but Ish is a real man, and a woman in Hebrew, Isha, the female of man. And so God said to Adam, what should we call this enchanting creature? And Adam said, well, since I have now become an Ish, she must be Isha. And sure enough, first time we see those terms employed in the book of Genesis. Exactly right. Because she makes me who I am. Some of you may wonder at the absence of my wife, if you may have noticed. This is by my request. You see, my wife is incapable of guile. And her face reveals exactly what she's thinking. Now, I promise you, I worked long and hard on my presentation today. I took the opportunity to be before you this afternoon terribly seriously. I did. And I will tell you that I enjoy dressing casually, but I will not stand before an audience I respect dressed in anything less than a suit and jacket and tie. That's not because I find it comfortable, which I don't. I do it in order to express the feelings I have to the people who have been willing to invest the one irreplaceable commodity in their lives, namely time, in what I am going to impart. And so I know that in spite of having prepared to my best ability of everything I wanted to tell you today, I know that there are going to be ways in which I explain something which may not be quite as well as I explained when I was running through the material with Susan last week. And her face will show displeasure. No, not displeasure. Her face will show disgust. And how I've said something. Now, please understand, I haven't said anything terribly. It's just maybe not quite as well as I'd be capable of if I worked another hour or two. And her face cannot help but show it. Now, because we understand the Ish-Isha relationship, that I am only a man because of her. I am who I am only because, I mean, I'll be the first to admit it. I'd hate to think where I'd be without her. She holds even my entire ego in the palm of her hand. And so that mere expression, because I am unfortunately exquisitely attuned to her expressions, and so whenever I'm speaking, and I speak for many, many, many churches around the United States and also elsewhere in the world. I spoke in China recently, I spoke in the UK, I spoke in Switzerland last month. But whenever I speak for a church, I always say, I hope you don't mind me mentioning this, and I hope it doesn't stress your logistical staff, but there's an old Jewish tradition that whenever a rabbi gives a speech, his wife is placed in another room. So, in all honesty, I tell you the entire truth. I actually prefer not being able to see her while I am spending time together with you and doing my best to convey a material that I consider important enough to take the time with. So that's what it is. But that's the Ish-Isha relationship. It's fundamental, it's powerful. What is more, it's laid out in that early second chapter. We find that the Garden of Eden is this place where they married, and to this day, within the Judeo-Christian biblical tradition, whether it's Jewish or Christian, the overwhelming majority of marriages come about by the man being first at the altar. Number two, the other person has to be different from you, because otherwise you're bringing nothing to the table or the bed, in creative terms. The third thing is that the way to make money well or to have good sex is to be obsessively preoccupied with the other person's joy and happiness. And that's exactly why it is that when somebody finishes a commercial transaction and walks out of a store with a new pair of sneakers with red lights in the heels that flash when you walk, the storekeeper, as you're walking out, says, "Was it good for you?" Or do I have that? Anyway, whatever it is, it doesn't matter, because it's the same thing. All right, fine, maybe he said, "Can I send you a survey in the mail?" Maybe. But whatever it is, the basic question is, are you leaving here happier than you were before? And in both situations, the answer is unequivocally yes. And finally, in both situations, the potential for creativity is down the road, but of incalculable size. When Mary and William Gates, Gates in Seattle, half a century ago or more, had a little baby called Bill, nobody knew. There was no way, right? Bill loved his wife Mary, and a few months down the road comes Bill. Incalculable potential. Nobody has any idea what could be ahead. with that little baby. That's right. And when you sit down over a table with someone else and engage in a transaction, you have no idea where that could lead. The biggest deals of the century started because two human beings sat down over a table and had lunch and discussed ways that they might be able to collaborate. That's how it works. And it's for exactly the same reason that telling yourself a joke is not a lot of fun. Because as soon as you start it, you say, "No, I know that one." Wait till you hear the punchline. I know the punchline already. And this is one of the reasons that if there were such a thing, which there isn't and there won't be, because although you can reproduce, you can clone the biology of any living thing, you cannot clone the soul of a human being. And so even if they have the identical DNA, like identical twins, they will still have different fingerprints, because fingerprints are a mark of our spiritual distinction. Nobody knows how two individuals in utero with the identical DNA can end up with totally different fingerprints, which they do. Nobody knows how that happens. And so we come up with all kinds of theories revolving around terms like epigenetics, which mean absolutely nothing really, because we don't know what it means. But basically, nobody has any idea of how two people with the same DNA have different fingerprints. Yeah, that's right, because our uniqueness as individuals is exactly what God said, right? We create human beings in my image. What does in my image mean? Well, that's what monotheism means, one God. Unique. Every human being is absolutely unique, different from every other human being, in a way that animals are not distinctive from one another, but human beings are distinctive from one another. So we know that obviously I can't tell a joke meaningfully to my full clone, if there were such a thing, which there isn't, and I also cannot brainstorm. Or brainstorming is a useful exercise. I'll sit down with a friend or two friends and I say, "Listen, I want to just run some ideas. Bounce back at me whatever you think. Your first reaction is what let me tell you, and I'll tell you this, and I'll tell you that, and we'll talk." And that's brainstorming. How would brainstorming be like with somebody who's you? Pointless. Nothing comes out of it. And so one of the requirements of both sex and money is that the person has to be different from you. One of the reasons that God prohibits us from marrying a sister, which on the surface of it would make a lot of sense, right? There's no arguments about where to go for Thanksgiving. It's great. But God prohibited it because it requires zero effort and integration. You are already too close. And so the entire creative process of two strangers being brought together through sex, it's irrelevant. It doesn't have to happen because they come from the same home. They're almost clones as it is. So creativity depends on this model. And it's not just the creativity of a human being, but it is the creativity of almost everything. In other words, the act of a transaction and making money is exactly the same as the act of sex, in the idea of two different people trying to serve one another, make each one happier than they were before, and through a process of combining and connecting, becoming something bigger than they ever were before. Extraordinary idea, absolutely extraordinary idea. And so the concept is brought even into areas of negotiation. Everybody has to engage in negotiation. If you're involved in any form of management or administration, you're engaged in negotiation. Well, here's something a little unusual. What is the Hebrew concept of masculinity? And what's the Hebrew concept of femininity? Well, there is such a thing as these concepts going beyond sex. In electricity, we have such things as male connectors and female connectors. Right? And it doesn't mean that one is more sensitive than the other. It's very basic. We understand that sexual realities have implications beyond the bedroom. And so, similarly, we understand in ancient Jewish wisdom that masculine is essentially the planting of a seed, is essentially the placing of a seed. Feminine is essentially nurturing that seed and helping to produce the result which the man on his own could never have accomplished. By the man being first at the altar, or as we would say, under the chuppah, but it's the man who's first there, and the man is there chatting with the officiant, the priest or the rabbi or the pastor, because nothing is happening until the bride arrives. And when does she arrive? Whenever she wants. And until then, everyone's standing around twiddling their thumbs or looking towards the door. But that's exactly what happened. Adam was in the Garden of Eden. And God says, you know what? It's not good for man to be alone. Now, this is a very striking note that has just been struck. Because up till now, God has said, oh, that's good. He said it not once, not twice. Anybody know? He said it 8 times. The last time he said it was about gold, which brings us back to money. But 8 times the Lord has said it's good. I mean, he seems to be an extraordinarily good-natured deity. Everything is, France is good, everything is good. And then all of a sudden, out of the blue, this very disturbing note. Not good for man to be alone. Why didn't Adam respond to God saying, hey Lord, take it easy. I don't feel alone. I get the remote whenever I feel like it. It's you and me, Lord. I don't feel alone. I got you, you got, I'm good. No, there's a recognition right there that something isn't right. And as you pointed out this morning, again, the next thing you would think is right after God said, not good for man to be alone, I better make him a helpmate, you'd think that the very next thing, the next verse should say, and God placed a deep anesthetic sleep on Adam. And it isn't. The next thing is, and God now introduced a zoological symposium. He paraded all the animals in front of Adam. For what purpose? Well, because God knew that there was a latent undercurrent within the soul of human beings to consider animals to be the equivalent of people. And so, to this day, one will hear of cases of people who serve longer prison terms for animal cruelty than for murder. You will hear of people who speak about, oh, my dog is better than any person I know because my dog would never do this or do that. People really are moving in that direction. The whole idea of not buying my wife a fur coat. I waited for years till I could buy my wife a fur coat. And we got thoroughly castigated by people at dinner parties. How can you? And I only had 2 things to say to them. One of them was, I'd like to give you the address of the local chapter of the Hells Angels who wear leather jackets. I'd like you to go talk to them. And number 2, I want you to know that your only objection to me draping a mink fur around my wife's shoulders is because you think the mink is my cousin. And I fully agree with you that killing my cousin and putting his skin on my wife's shoulders would be in bad taste. There's no question about it. But that's quite different with respect to animals. There is a blurring of the relationship between people and animals. Now, one of the great things, one of the seductive aspects of that is it opens up sex to different parameters. Because if we are nothing but animals, then all the religiously rooted conventions that over the years have sculpted our relationships between men and women fall away. They now become nothing but quaint conceits of a disturbed people who imagine religious realities. But the truth is, we're nothing other than sophisticated animals. That's all. But it's not altogether as simple as that, because although I understand that that may well be part of the appeal in pulling people towards that animalistic vision of the world, yes, it does. It's very appealing. It takes away many of the rules and rituals and restraints around the passions of life that the Judeo-Christian culture has built on a biblical basis. And you strip those away, and who knows where society, oh wait, we do know where society goes. Yeah, I think we do. So God says, I want you to see all of these animals. Absolutely. Get to know them. I want you to see that these are not for you. They do not fulfill that deep, empty longing in your soul. That can only be filled by a woman. And then we move on. And God brings Eve. And then a little while later, there is the fall, the eating of the fruit, and the eviction from the Garden of Eden. An interesting thing happens. Adam is distraught. Eve is distraught. They are now facing a huge unknown with all kinds of painful realities like death and having to earn a living. And God's response, and by the way, in the Hebrew tradition, this is not part of the punishment. This is actually part of the acceptance. This is part of the embrace. Because one of the worries that Adam expresses to the Lord is, how are we going to eat? Up till now in the Garden of Eden, there it was. It was like being on welfare. It's great. And God says, don't worry. From here onwards, by the sweat of your brow, you will eat bread. And that's a good thing, not a bad thing. And it is from that moment that in the Hebrew culture, the word bread became synonymous with money. Which, by the way, in many languages, including English, to this very day it still is, right? Have you got any bread on you? Remember from teenage years?
Yeah.
Or how about, can you lend me any dough?
Yeah.
Same phrase, same concept. Because back there in chapter 2 of Genesis, we deal with marriage and money. Those are the two things. Adam and Eve are now dependent upon one another outside the Garden of Eden like never before. And from here onwards, they are going to be, part of their humanity is going to be making a living, making money. And so marriage and money are unified right up front there. But wait, there's more. Because the maleness and femaleness of Adam and Eve actually serves as a model within ancient Jewish wisdom for all creativity. What do you mean? Well, think about this. How is money made? Money isn't made when the central bank turns the cranks and prints currency. That is merely providing paper evidence of money. But the money has a more deep-rooted existence. What is it anyway? Is money physical or spiritual? Can you touch it? Well, I know I can touch the strips of colored paper in my wallet, and I know I can pat my pocket and make the discs of metal make a sound, and that's money, I get that. But how about if I write you a check? Isn't that also money? How about if I don't write you anything? How about if I shake hands and say I'll give you $10 on Friday? That's my word, it's a contract. That brings money into existence right there. Money comes about when one human being serves another human being. That's when it happens. There is no way for money to come about in any other way whatsoever. The government can move money about, it can take from one person and give to another, but the act of creating money was God's way of incentivizing people to serve his other children. That's all it is. And so if there are no kosher restaurants in Southbridge, but the Army has provided more than enough. This bald Orthodox rabbi may well have eaten one good meal too many already. But no hungry here. There are no kosher restaurants in Southbridge anyway. There aren't. But interestingly enough, if there were, and I took my wife there, one of the ways this might have worked is that, let's imagine I'm a roofer and somebody calls me up and I'm just about to head out to take my kids to play ball in the park, and he calls and says, hey, the forecast is for rain, I've got a hole in my kitchen roof, it's driving us crazy, you've got to come and fix it. And I say to him, I'm really sorry, I'm just about to take my kids off to the park, and I can hear God saying, oh, I'm getting a 2x4 ready to get your attention. What do you mean? I really don't care if you play ball in the park with your kids, but I do care that you serve another one of my children. He's in need. He's got a hole in his roof and it's going to rain. That's where your attention should be. And I say, yeah, you're right. Thank you, Lord. And I say to the children, you know what, kids, forget the ball. This is a much more important thing we're going to do. Much more important. You know, I often hear people saying, you should always be at your kids' ball games because on your gravestone it's only another hour in the office, but I think it's a terrible lesson, frankly. I think it's a wonderful lesson for kids to hear, you know what, I wish I could be at your ball game, but I can't. I've got a client or a customer to take care of. Money is the consequence of how I'm taking care of God's other children. It's not the basis of it, it's the consequence. It happens automatically if I take care of other people's desires and needs. And so I pack the children in the truck, get the toolbox, get the ladder, we fix the roof, and at the end of it, the person whose roof I fixed says, so anything we need to do to finish off the business? I say, yes, I would like 100 certificates of good performance. I want to be able to prove that I did in fact take care of another one of God's children. He says, oh sure. And he reaches in his pocket, peels off 5 20s and gives me. I say, thank you very much indeed. And off I go. That night I take my wife to the kosher restaurant and we sit down and we call out to the proprietor, 2 of the biggest steaks and 2 big plates of fries, please. And he says, excuse me? Do you really expect me to slave over a hot stove just because you want food? And I say, well, it sort of says restaurant up there outside. And he says, yeah, but it's only for people who are part of the club of good performance. I said, what does that mean? He says, well, I will be happy to give you a bill, but then I'm going to want you to give me some certificates of good performance to show that I took care of some of God's hungry children. So no problem, I get it, I can do that. And we have a wonderful meal, and at the end of it I said, how many? He says, that'll be 75 certificates of good performance. That's what money is. It proves that God's children took care of one another. That's all it is. And it's basic to our relationships. Money is God's way of incentivizing, of caring for one another. So it fits. And that's why it is that both that seed and helping to produce the result which the man on his own could never have accomplished. But here's the best part. And in this I may sound perilously close to contemporary concepts of gender fluidity, but I'm not, I assure you. What I'm pointing out is that in a negotiation, the male and female roles keep switching backwards and forwards. As they do with humor, by the way. If somebody's telling a joke, who's the male and who's the female. Well, I'm listening to the joke, I'm receiving it, so I'm the female, and the person telling over the joke is the male. And so he is giving over the idea, I'm receiving it. Do you know what's really horrible? When you're telling a joke and you can tell the person you're telling it to is busy thinking up a joke to tell you when you finish talking. He's not being a good listener. He's not being a good receiver. He's trying to become the male before you've switched roles. Right now, you're supposed to be stimulating me by listening to me. Your receptivity is what makes me who I am. But if you get rid of that, then what am I? And so every negotiation works like that. Somebody says, "Listen, I want to propose a deal to you. Here's what I'm thinking of." And you lay it out. And a good businessman or administrator or bureaucrat or whoever it is listening avidly, making sure that he gets it. So much so that if he's really smart, he may well say to you at that point, "Let me just make sure I got this clear. Are you saying that this would be what you envisage as the deal?" And he's, "Yeah, exactly." And that's a very good step because I've assured him that I'm listening. And now we switch roles because he's waiting for my response. And my response is now going to be, "I don't think that I can do exactly what you're suggesting. But here's what I could do. How would you feel if we went this way?" And now the roles are completely reversed. And so it is by switching the masculine and feminine roles backwards and forwards as we move along. The result is an act of creativity. The result is some kind of deal which actually has happened. It's a real thing. It's huge. Obviously, there are activities and processes that are more masculine, others that are more feminine, obviously. But at the same time, it's always necessary to be aware of what the fundamentals are. If I were to give you an example, I would say, look, there are over 100,000 significant bridges on the planet. Very few of them resemble others. If you are a photographer and you take a picture of every bridge on your next trip, and you look afterwards at 300 pictures of 300 bridges, very unlikely that any of them will look the same. They may be similar. Many of them will be suspension bridges. Many of them will be girder bridges. Many of them will be single pylon bridges. There are all kinds of bridges. But as a photographer, every one of those bridges is different. But now, let's say we look at those 300 bridges as an engineer. How do you feel about the bridges now? They're all exactly the same. From an engineering point of view, they all have to cross a gap. And whether that gap is a valley or a railroad track or a river is irrelevant. They all have to deal with load. They all have to handle that load in some way or another. That load has to be transferred to solid earth or rock beneath, and all have to provide access and off-ramp ways for people to get on and off the bridge. The bridges are all exactly the same, but only from an engineering point of view. What ancient Jewish wisdom does for me in the area of sex, and money as it happens, but in the area of sex, what ancient Jewish wisdom does is lay out the engineering principles. What any particular relationship is actually going to look like is up to the couple. An engineering principle, for instance, I said before, is that marriage is rooted on contract, not emotion. That's a principle. Now, what you make of that in your marriage, it's up to you. It's a free will. Everybody can make of their lives what they wish. The only thing is, everyone can make a bridge as they wish, but if you ignore any of the engineering principles, you do need to be ready to take the consequences. Very near where Chaplain Felsenberg served at Fort Lewis in the state of Washington was a bridge called the Tacoma Narrows Bridge. And in the 1940s, just very soon after it was built, it fell in the water. Why? Because there was wind. And nobody yet had it figured out in the 1940s that wind can set up resonant frequencies on the roadbed of the bridge. And if the resonant frequency matches the resonant frequency of the structure, it's why in the olden days they used to tell soldiers to break step crossing a bridge, because with everybody coming down on their right foot at the same moment in the same cadence, there'd be a danger of damaging the bridge very severely. Well, the bridge went down into the water because they ignored a principle which is since rooted in the engineering textbooks. And so we have certain principles that impact male-female relationships. They're just like the rules that impose a bridge. Every single bridge will be different. Every single marriage will be different. Dare I say, every single sexual relationship is going to be different. And there are going to be some that are very distant from the engineering blueprints. But as long as I have a clear picture of what those fundamental principles of engineering are, those are not restraints on my creativity. They are not shackles on my freedom. They are liberators. Because as long as I know what the unchangeable principles are, I can build any bridge I like. And it'll be strong and safe and reliable. And it'll depend on aesthetics and economics and all kinds, and maybe the local politician who wants his name on it, whatever it is. It doesn't matter, because as an engineer, I'm freed by the rules that say, as long as you keep these in mind, you can let your creativity run rampant. It doesn't matter. And so it is within the principles that we deal with. We establish what are these unchangeable realities? What are the anchors that provide the reliability and durability of the structure? With that in mind, I'm able to both go ahead and do any kind of bridge I like, but more importantly, I can also help people who built fragile bridges. I can also analyze the bridge. I can diagnose what is wrong with the bridge, and I might be able to do, as often happens in engineering, I might be able to retroactively apply Band-Aids to the bridge, or maybe even better than Band-Aids. I may be able to solve the engineering problems and make the bridge okay. That's why it's so important for me to understand that set of basic principles that govern sexual relationship. Got those clear, there's tremendous utility and tremendous freedom that results from that. And so we know, for instance, that the nature of the sexual relationship exclusively for children? No, not so. Not so at all. If that were the case, if my sister was beyond menopause, I could marry her. No, the prohibition against marrying my sister is under each and every and all circumstances. Children are a subsequent development of that. Children come about that way. Why? Well, God wanted a way of telling us that the biggest fun in the whole world is making somebody else feel good. And heaven knows you need that before you have kids. We got to learn that giving is always more fun than taking. Heaven knows, you've got to know that before you have kids. That all of these things flow out of the sexual relationship. If this was really all about evolution and all about biology, why then there would be no question that human males would have evolved a baculum just like virtually every single male mammal in the whole planet does, including our closest relationships, according to people with whom I disagree, orangutans and baboons and chimpanzees. They've all got baculums. Oh, what's a baculum, I hear you say? A baculum is something that gives the executives at Pfizer nightmares. A baculum would render the Viagra business utterly obsolete. A baculum is the technical term for what's known as a penile bone. when intercourse is imminent, this bone, literally a bone, slides into place and impotence has vanished forever. There is nothing that would be more useful for the propagation of the species. If having children was all that this was about, then human beings would have evolved a baculum just like chimpanzees did, because it makes perfect sense. Why would you want to leave something as important as the propagation of the species to the mood of the man? My goodness, one tough day at work and humanity vanished. And so we can solve this all. And yet, God saw fit that of all the mammals on the planet, that the one touched by his finger lacks this device to make clear that with no deep, significant, and real emotional connection, without the handling of this relationship according to the engineering principles in the textbook, this isn't going to work. And sure enough, that's exactly what we're seeing today. And so we're provided with this remarkable set of principles having to do with human connectivity, which is absolutely fundamental to God's message to mankind, so much so that in the Hebrew nomenclature, the word 10 Commandments is not used. There isn't such a thing. It's called the 10 Statements. They surely cannot be the foundation of God's contract with mankind, because how could it leave out like critically important things like thou shalt tithe to thy church, right? I mean, that's not there. Or how would you leave out critical things that we find in the book of Deuteronomy, the obligation to set up a legal system? You can't have a durable society without a legal system that is based on justice. None of that's in the 10 Commandments. It doesn't even say to pray in the 10 Commandments. No, in Jewish culture, they're not called the 10 Commandments at all. They're called the 10 Statements. How many times in the 5 books of Moses are they called the 10 Statements? I believe it's 3 times. How many times are they referred to as something else? Over 30 times. What's the something else? They're called the 2 tablets. You realize what this means is that the 2-ness is more important than the 10-ness, if you know what I mean. Because they're constantly referred to as these 2 tablets which I'm given. There's the 2 tablets of the law, the 2 tablets, 10 Commandments, 3 times, I think, maybe. 2 tablets. Why? Because the 2-ness implies something which is, again, fundamental to our understanding of what God wants from us, which is to connect. And he gives us 2 beautiful incentives for connectivity, money and sex. But he wants us to connect. But before he can make us connect with one another, right, and by the way, anybody who has children knows how important it is to you that your children get on with one another. You want them to care for one another. And so, how do you do this? How do you make sure that your children connect? Well, you incentivize them. You can connect sexually, and that's very worthwhile. You can connect financially, and that's very worthwhile for everybody, both sides. This is terrific, and it could really work. But, you see, the system requires that we all get behind the principle, the underlying principle of connectivity. That's why the 10 Commandments is structured very beautifully. It's structured as 2 sets of 5. The 10 Commandments is really 5 principles of connectivity relating with 2 examples of each. So commandment number 1 corresponds to commandment number 6. Commandment number 2 corresponds to 7. Commandment number 3 to 8, and so on and so forth. So 1 is, I am the Lord your God, right? That's an initial statement. What's number 6? You'll never forget, after I tell you this, by the way, you'll never forget the order of the commandments. You'll always be able to get it right. The number 6 is, thou shalt not murder. Because the rule is, you and I have no relationship if we do not acknowledge one another's existence. If I see you as somebody to be eliminated if you annoy me, forget about a relationship. It's not possible. Only if I accept that no matter how irritating you are, I can never murder you, then, okay, then we've got the basis. That's number 1. I accept your existence. And so it is with our relationship upwards to God. I'm the Lord your God. Okay, if you don't If that bothers you, we have nowhere to go. Number 2, no other gods. Number 7, no adultery. You can't commoditize your relationships. Your relationship with your spouse has to be different from your relationship with anybody else in the whole world. You can't commoditize. You can't treat everybody the same. And so it goes. And we don't have time for it now, but you get the idea. You can do this by yourselves if you're in any interest. You go through all 10 and you'll see it's 3 rules of connectivity. And that's the principle. That's how it works. And at its root, the model for connectivity that actually means something, connectivity that is going somewhere, connectivity that makes God smile, is that model of male and female relationships. And I realize that that's really something that each and every one of you has to do, and the people whose spiritual welfare you constantly care for, everybody is focused on the mission. And if the mission of the army had a gender, I would have no doubt whatsoever that it's a masculine mission. That's what armies do. That doesn't mean that there are not women actively engaged, and it doesn't mean that everybody in the army is busy blowing up things or breaking things, obviously, but the mission as a whole is a masculine mission. Well, that's great, that's fine, because whether you are a man or a woman, you get the mission. And once you understand the engineering principles, the unchangeable realities underpinning everything, then you're free to make the adjustments necessary and the accommodations that can make your particular circumstances work, and the arrangements necessary to make sure that people for whom you are responsible can function and can find peace and hope. Yeah, it's beautiful. And that's the great gift that the good Lord gives us. A system, a matrix of principles, of rules, rituals, and restraints, essentially the book of engineering on how to build bridges. Bridges between human beings, yes. Bridges that have at their root the magic of the male-female relationship. You've all been very, very tolerant and very, very kind. I appreciate it. It's been an honor for me to be here. I want to thank Chaplain Hurley and Chaplain Solomon, Chaplain Akers, and Chaplain Shaw. I appreciate very much, first of all, the invitation. It means an enormous amount to me to play even some tiny, insignificant role in adding to the vitality of the work you all do. It means a lot to me, and I value the opportunity. I thank you all for making that possible. And of course, to my dear friend, Chaplain Felsenberg and his wife. You all probably don't know how much of a celebrity he is in the Jewish community. I mean, it's just, oh, Chaplain Felsenberg. But where I come from, he's a big name. So.